Hello and welcome to the Emerging Midwest Invasives series webinar on Japanese stiltgrass. This webinar series is hosted by the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and this particular webinar is sponsored by the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association. So we definitely thank them for their sponsorship, and you can learn more about them at ifwoa.org. So today's webinar is about Japanese stiltgrass, which is kind of a funny one for emerging if you're in the southern part of the Midwest, but it's actively moving throughout the northward into the Midwest. And so for a lot of the region, it really is a kind of early detection species or not even there yet. And if you're on the southern end of the range, there's a lot of it. So it's kind of one of those that really is dependent on where you're at. But it's definitely worthy of talking about for this series just because it's so new to a lot of the Midwest. I'm going to shut off my video so you can see the full screens. And so if you're unfamiliar with Japanese stiltgrass, it is, as I mentioned, it's well established in the southern portions of the Midwest. It's one of our #1 problems here in far southern Illinois. You could certainly say the same for Kentucky and southern Indiana and parts of Missouri as well. But it is actively spreading to the other areas of this region, and it is very, very impactful to forested ecosystems. And that coupled with the fast spread and difficulty controlling infestations really make this a primary species to be a target, for priority management and really an emerging invasive. So you may have heard of Japanese stiltgrass by some of its other names. So it goes by Nepalese brown top. So sometimes the federal government, a lot of websites for them still call it that. Eualia or packing grass, but overall Japanese stiltgrass seems to be the most commonly used accepted common name for it. And it really falls into this different category of it's a annual warm season grass that grows well in the shade. And that's kind of an unusual category to fall into in terms of grasses, which it means that it really puts on its growth mid-season, but again, it's an annual, so only lasts 1 year, reproduces only through seed production, right? So it's really an unusual grass that way. It does tend to prefer moist forest where it really does very, very well, though it does have a large habitat kind of range of where it can grow. I've seen it all the way growing into uplands and tops of cliffs, things like that, though it does best in these moist forests. And it's a species that's easily transported on equipment, shoes, horses, ATVs, etc., which highlights that its ability to move around and be found in new environments fairly easily. Now, in terms of identifying stiltgrass, I'm going to start by just laying out all of the kind of characteristics that you'll see, and then we'll look at pictures and talk about each one more in the following slides. But it is a weak-rooted annual, which means that it pulls out of the ground really easily. And that's one of the things I like to do if I'm unsure it's stiltgrass, or I recommend people do, is that most of the lookalikes that you may mistake for stiltgrass or be confused, a lot of those, or most of them, are perennials, which means they'll have a well-developed root system. Stiltgrass, being an annual, has a tiny root system. So if you grab it, give it a little yank, it ought to pull out of the ground fairly easily, and you can see this kind of real thin, tiny root system. So that's actually a very good kind of identification characteristic. And then when you do pull it up and look at those roots, it has these short aerial roots, these little spurs that come down in the air before the roots take hold. And these are little stilts, they call them, or stilted roots, which is where it gets its name of stiltgrass. And you can really see that when you pull it up. Overall, the plant is, 1 to 6 feet tall, something like that, depending on where it's growing and other characteristics. But the big thing is that it tends to be a sprawling plant, and that means that the stems are very weak. They don't stand. It doesn't stand up on by itself very easily. Once it gets over about 18 inches tall, it tends to kind of flop over or lay over, and so it'll either lay over and sprawl along the ground, or it'll be propped up by other vegetation. Really, really kind of different than a lot of other grasses. The leaves or blades are short and wide. So overall, they're usually 2 to 4 inches long and 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch wide or so. So pretty short, pretty fat compared to a lot of other leaf blades. And then it may or may not have a whitish or silvery midrib along the center of the leaf. So sometimes this shows up very well, and you can kind of see it in this picture here. Other times it's totally absent. So it's there, but it's not always there. So it's not the most reliable characteristic to use. The flowers and the seeds on stiltgrass aren't something we use a lot for ID because they tend to come on late in the year and then they're up and then they kind of fall over when they get heavy. But overall, they occur on thin spike-like racemes, 1 to 2 or 3 branched inflorescences, again, long, wiry stem. We'll talk about the other types of flowers it has here in a bit too. But just kind of looking at these characteristics, so here is those, a good picture of those aerial roots, and you can see there how they have these long, straight little stilts that are above ground before it gets into the roots, and you can see that the root system really isn't much to talk about, right? So kind of a weak root system pulls up easily, presence of these aerial roots, and you can see here some longer aerial roots, those stilted roots, but there's still really a weak root system. And again, the sprawling stems, and this is a great example of it here in this picture. You can see in the lower left there that the plants are just kind of laying over and flopping over over their own weight. And overall, this is really common that the stems just aren't very rigid. The plant doesn't stand up very easily. It's easily pushed over. Just another shot of it here, even with some flowering on it. You can see that kind of those stems are laying over here and there. Oftentimes it's propped up on other vegetation. And these pictures here, you can see there's some down treetops, and you can see the stiltgrass kind of using that to give a little bit of structure to them and allow them to stand up a little taller than they otherwise would. Here's another look at the short, wide leaves, again, 2 to 4 inches long, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch wide. And again, this shot really shows those whitish midribs fairly well. Oftentimes the leaves, especially those top 2 leaves, I've heard people describe them as little bunny ears. So the top 2 leaves kind of stand out. They often sit kind of almost at a flat angle to the ground like that. But especially compare that to the lower left of this picture. And that lower left, that's a river oats, a young river oats plant there. And you can see those leaves are much longer, much more tapered, and then lacking that whitish midrib, just as a good comparison. However, that midrib isn't always super visible. The picture on the left here, this stiltgrass leaf doesn't really have it, and it's barely visible on the picture on the right. So it does vary right there. But overall, that leaf shape, short, fat leaf, is really what you're looking for stiltgrass, even at a very young age. And you can see here, these are young germinates. You can still see that leaf shape showing there, and it's really readily identifiable even from, just the first couple tillers that come out of the ground. Here's just another shot of that showing an overall infestation. You can see the leaf shape here, kind of how the leaves droop down a little bit there, and even see the whitish midribs on them. And then just lastly, the last characteristic are these, the flowerings, the inflorescences. You can see here 1, 2, 3 flowers, spikes on wiry stems. And this plant blooms late in the year. So a lot of times it may be middle of August, even September. I've even seen it still blooming or showing its active seed heads well into October, right? So usually you don't see those flowers on this plant until late summer or early fall. In fact, here's a picture from a few years ago, and I wanted to look it up to see the time of year it was, and it was October 5th when the plant looked like this. So you can see very late compared to most other grasses out there. You usually don't see this level of flowering on the ground with stiltgrass unless it's really in the open, right? So this is a shade-tolerant plant. In the shade, it doesn't produce a ton of seed. And so you won't see in a shaded environment this level of seed production. You can see all those wiry stems there. This happens to be a little field opening at the edge of a forest where the stiltgrass was just going crazy. And you can see that high level of stem production for its flowers. That's not necessarily the normal situation that you have with stiltgrass. In a forested situation, in a canopy, you'll have much fewer flowers on it, and it won't be quite that robust. Now, Stiltgrass has a second type of flower, right? So these are the open pollinated flowers at the top of the plant. At the same time, they also produce closed self-pollinated flowers. So these occur lower down on the plant on these short spurs. And so it occurs around the same time, maybe a little bit earlier. But if you dig down and look lower on the plant and you see these short little side spurs coming out of the stems, if you grab those and peel back the leaves and peel back the where it's wrapped around the stem, it's going to hide a closed flower that's self-pollinated. And so here's just a shot of it here. You can see there the fruit that's on this one after I pulled back the leaves to kind of expose them. And then zooming in, you can see the fruit on it there. And so Stiltgrass has both types of flowers, open and closed pollinated flowers. Open, of course, at the top of the plant, closed lower down on those side spurs. And so just a review here, kind of this is throughout the year. In Southern Illinois, where I'm at, we usually see germination in mid-March. So you'll start then, and then since it's a warm season grass, a lot of times it kind of just sits there, right? And it doesn't do much. It doesn't put on a lot of growth until things really start warming up in midsummer. And then midsummer is really when it puts on a lot of that biomass and grows and really builds a lot of that size to it. Late summer, early falls when you'll get flowering. And then even into winter when it starts dying back, and in the winter you get this bright thatchy color. And so it's identifiable really all year because especially bigger infestations like the picture on the lower right there, you can pick it out in the winter pretty easily. So again, just highlighting it, late spring germination, you can see the little newly germinates here. Really identifiable even at this small stage. And then it'll have a few tillers on there, slow growth initially, and it kind of sits idle and stays, at a small state throughout the rest of the spring, even into early summer. Still readily identifiable. You can still see that same leaf shape in there. And it kind of holds on to this size, this shape, for a lot until, again, till things start warming up in midsummer. And then that's really where it starts putting on a lot of its biomass. And you can see a picture here where it's really dominating this intermittent stream here, really putting on a lot of that biomass. At this point, it's readily identifiable. You can see those the leaf shapes really easy, those kind of paired rabbit ear type leaves on it in the picture here. Same thing here, right? Just looking at different infestations, it's really you can see those characteristics, that leaf shape really jumps out to you. And then again, late summer, early fall, it's kind of when it gets hot in the summer, you get that peak biomass accumulation as it's getting ready to flower. And that's really when you see a lot of the size of Stiltgrass come out, is that midsummer working towards late summer. See larger stands of it. I thought this picture was really interesting. So this is a site here where Stiltgrass dominates right at the forest edge. And then as you go into the darker components of the forest, and especially uphill, you really lose Stiltgrass. It's not there at all. So it really occurred right on the edge, lower down. You had higher light environments, higher soil moisture, and then it actually moved out into the open area too. It was just being mowed when it got out a little farther than that. But a good highlight to just show kind of the level of growth of Stiltgrass. This is a great picture, kind of peak biomass, late summer, just loaded in. This is a small stream corridor here, a lot of adequate soil moisture, a little bit of light in there, and it just dominates. And then again, early to mid-fall flowering, maybe late summer flowering and seed set. You can see it starting to flower here on a couple different shots. And then later on, as the flowers give way to seeds, you can see in this shot here. Right, so this is kind of, again, late summer into fall. Late fall, it starts its dieback after its seeds are produced, and it does tend to die back from the top down. So it gets this real reddish purple color or brown coloration, and it kind of starts at the top and works its way down. And that's really where it gets its name, brown top, which is one of the other common names for it, is its tendency to get this coloration in the fall. You can see a kind of a larger stand here showing that as well. And then wintertime, that bright colored thatch, right, really stands out. Very, very identifiable, especially on bigger infestations. And a lot of times we even survey and map this species in the winter time because it jumps out then. As long as there's not snow covered, you can pick up this thatch fairly easily. This coloration's pretty obvious. There are a few lookalikes that you may mistake for stiltgrass. Big one that jumps to mind are the dicantheliums, so the woodland panic grasses. They have a similar shaped leaf. They're going to be very hairy typically and perennial, so they don't pull out of the ground. They have bigger seed heads as well, so they look quite a bit different. But that's one that you may mistake for muley grass or nimblewill. The picture on the left here is another one that has kind of narrow, short leaves, much more narrow than stiltgrass though. Learsia grass, so Learsia virginica, vanilla grass or whatever you want to call it, is a really common grass in the woodlands around here that roughly the same size as stiltgrass, grows in a lot of the same environments, but much longer, thinner leaves as well. Also a perennial, so when you pull it, tug on it, it won't pop out of the ground more easily. And then anything like young rye grasses, young river oats, you may mistake for it as well. But again, those are typically going to have much longer leaves and a very different leaf shape. One interesting lookalike that I see people mistaking for stiltgrass some is actually some of those smaller smartweeds, the polygonums, right? So, of course, they're dicots, their flowers look totally different, but when it's not flowering, it has a very, very similar growth habits and leaf shape. And so a lot of people, without looking, kind of can mistake a patch of smartweed for stiltgrass. Of course, stiltgrass is a monocot, so it'll have parallel venation. Smartweeds are dicot, so they have branching venation. So it's pretty easy to tell them apart with a closer inspection, but from a distance, I've actually seen people mistake those quite a bit. So just a quick review on ID of stiltgrass. It's a weak-rooted annual with short aerial roots. That fact that it has those weak roots because it pulls out really easily out of the ground if you give it a little tug. Sprawling, weak stems, particularly as it gets over about 18 inches tall, it does tend to sprawl pretty easily. Short, wide leaves, 2 to 4 inches long, 1/2 to 3/4 inch wide, with a noticeable whitish midrib that may be there, but also may not be there, kind of varies. And then the flowers, these thin spike-like racemes on these long, wiry stems for the flowering late in the year. So we're talking late summer or fall. And then you can also look lower down and find those side spurs for those closed flowers. So that's how you can identify it. Again, I really love giving a yank, pulling it up, and then that leaf shape is really what gets you there. Now, why we're concerned about stiltgrass, let's just talk a little bit about the ecology and the impacts of it. So it was first introduced or first found in 1919 in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was found out, in a creek. They think it got here as packing material, kind of lining shipments of porcelain or something. And then the packing material, when it arrived, was just discarded and then it spread into that creek. And then pretty quickly from then, it kind of spread throughout the rest of the South, the Mid-South anyways, and up throughout the Northeast. Kind of more recently now as it's spreading into the Midwest. And in fact, it was first found in southern Illinois in 1968 along the Ohio River. But then it's moved, it's kind of spreading throughout the state, and then again the rest of the Midwest. It was first found in Iowa, I think in 2014, Michigan in 2018, Ontario in 2019, and Wisconsin in 2020. So you can see it's actively spreading throughout the upper Midwest right now. Currently, it's found in about 31 states and 1 province. So here's a map of stiltgrass range. You can see heavily dominating the mid-south there and the upper southeast, all the way into the mid-Atlantic and up into portions of the lower parts of New England, and then throughout much of the mid-south and much of the lower Midwest, and ranging and moving into the upper Midwest now. The small seeds can be picked up. They don't have burrs or anything that's kind of doesn't grab onto your clothing like that, but it can be picked into mud. So a lot of times, if you walk through stiltgrass, the seeds can fall off and land in your cuffs of your pants or in your shoes, something like that. But it also be picked up in mud, easily transported by equipment, water, through floodwaters, overland flow, through gravity simply working its way downhill. And then animals, whether that's deer or something moving it, or horses kind of picking it up and moving it, and their the mud on their shoes, something like that. So a lot of ways it moves around. Once it's in an environment, it does tend to move fairly quickly and spread fairly quickly. And this is just a couple shots highlighting that. On the left is a pile of gravel to kind of fill in on I took the picture standing on a gravel road, and you can see all the stilt grass around it. So as soon as that gravel gets moved, it's going to move around. And on the right hand here, it's a picture showing a small road loaded with stiltgrass at the edge, and it's just going to make its way downhill from this road just by gravity into the adjacent forest. But locally, once it's in a site, really it's overland flow and water spread. And so here's an intermittent stream. You can see just loaded with stiltgrass making its way, kind of following that whole environment as the waters flow. It just moves the stiltgrass seed. And then on the right, of course, is a stream having a little bit of stiltgrass stuck in it. So again, at a site, when it's at a site, it tends to move downhill and move with overland flow of water very, very effectively. And a couple years ago, we discovered that turkeys may be a major vector of local spread as well. This is the crop contents from a wild turkey harvested in the fall a couple years ago, and cut it open to see what it was eating, and it just completely full of Japanese stiltgrass seeds. The whole crop was, and there was two that was harvested at the same time, and both of their crops looked just like this, just loaded with stiltgrass seeds. What we don't know is how well the stiltgrass seeds survive passing through the digestive system of the turkey. We actually want to go out in the fall during stiltgrass, when stiltgrass seeds are actively falling, collect turkey droppings and then grow them out to see if we can get stiltgrass to grow out of them. It'd be kind of a fun project. Now, overall, the potential for stiltgrass to grow a seed bank, you see a lot in the literature that seeds will live in the soil 7 to 10 years or something like that. And that may be true, but really the research out there shows that stiltgrass has a pretty high initial germination rate. So the vast majority of those seeds tend to germinate and try to grow that first year, and then, or especially that second year. So there's only a very, very small percentage of the seeds that survive in the soil past 2 years. Again, the vast majority of them try to germinate that first or second year, but there can be a few that last longer than that. In terms of habitat where stiltgrass grows, again, it grows in a wide variety of different habitats, all the way from very dry upland sites down to very wet sites. But overall, its performance in terms of how much it grows and how much seed it produces is likely limited both by light availability and soil moisture. So where it does best, it produces the most seed in the densest populations, are areas with adequate soil moisture and kind of enough light to grow. So forest edges, roadsides, places like that tend to be where it really does best. And in fact, there's been some studies out there show that these edge populations that do have enough light tend to serve as a source that's connected to interior populations that are in more heavy shade, that kind of serve as a sink in terms of they grow there, stiltgrass grows there, but it doesn't produce enough seed to kind of replace itself. And it's kind of getting seed washing in from those edge populations to kind of maintain those more shaded environments. And then one thing we've noticed is in drought years, often there's little to no seed production on stiltgrass in a really droughty environment, a really drought year. It just doesn't produce a lot of seed. And so where you tend to find stiltgrass in an environment most would be stream sides, roadsides, forest edges, fire lines that were created because of that soil disturbance, wet draws or intermittent streams. And then it tends to have a disturbance-driven invasion in a forest setting, which means anything like a prescribed fire or a timber harvest or heavy thinning, storm damage, anything like that that creates bare soil and enhanced light conditions into the understory will really drive invasion on stiltgrass. It really kind of allows it to take off and form these big stands. In terms of impacts of Japanese stiltgrass, we know that it excludes other native understory species, and so an infestation tends to lower diversity in plots and areas that get invaded. Other research has found a decrease in species richness following invasion, although that decrease tends to be fast, and then we don't see subsequent additional decreases. So that the impacts are really early on with an invasion, and then it kind of holds its own after that. There's some research out there showing there may be some impact to tree seedling growth, but there's a couple different research projects looking at that, and their results do vary. We do know that stiltgrass has a big impact to soil properties, and so it accelerates nitrogen cycling and organic matter decomposition in the soil, and that leads to an overall loss of soil nitrogen and soil carbon. And then stiltgrass promotes fire just by having so much extra fine fuels on the environment. And then it is also promoted by fire. So not only do you see hotter fires, more fires in areas with stiltgrass, you also see areas that have fires. Stiltgrass invasion tends to follow that, or stiltgrass tends to be thicker density in areas following fire. And that is a little bit dependent upon the timing of fire. So really, really late spring fires, kind of after germination of stiltgrass, can be a method to kind of control some of those germinants, right? So, but it has to be quite late in the season to do that. And there has been recently this fungus that's been found on stiltgrass impacting it. And there's some people looking at using that as potential as a biocontrol agent as well. But it is something we see a lot of, actually. A lot of stands, you'll see this this kind of conditions, these symptoms on stiltgrass. It doesn't seem to wipe it out. I haven't seen any reduction, long-term reduction in stiltgrass, even in areas that has a lot of this fungus, though. Now, if you're looking at managing stiltgrass, since it is an annual, and annuals live year to year simply through their seed production, that's the only way that population exists year to year. Every annual plant is going to die that year, right? Regardless. So your goal is to stop seed production. When you're managing stiltgrass, that's really all you care about, because that plant's going to die anyway that year, whether you control it or not. You want to stop seed production, right? You need to do everything you do, and your timing needs to be geared towards doing that before the seeds are produced. And so you got some options out there. There's mechanical options like mowing, pulling, weed whipping, and burning, and there's chemical options, both contact herbicides, systemic, or pre-emergent herbicides. So just some general management recommendations. Hand pulling is an option because it pulls up so easily, and it can be a really good option for smaller infestations. If you have a really early detection event and just a little bit of stiltgrass, just pulling it out of the ground can be a great way to control it, right, for small infestations. For larger infestations, mechanical means might be mowing or weed whipping. This can really reduce seed set of an area, and it should be done late in the summer, right? So you're talking close enough to flowering, but before it flowers. And the reason you want to do that is you want to cut it down as low as you can so that it has the least amount of time to grow back and produce seed that year before frost gets it, right? Sometimes you want to maybe repeat mowing or repeat weed whipping in a year, but it can be done. But again, you want to time it just right so that you're avoiding that seed production. And then similarly, propane torching can be used to treat seedlings in the spring. The problem is if you do it too early in the spring, it can you can get subsequent germination following that and then still have plants grow. And then it can be used to treat larger plants before flowering, but those are pretty big, and so it may not be the best option because it just requires a lot of effort with a propane torch. So there is some applicability there, but you got to understand the limitations. When you're looking at herbicidal control of it, some of the common broad spectrum herbicides like glyphosate have shown to be very, very effective. But you do have a little bit of a potential for off-target impacts because those broad spectrum ones, work on really any plant. The good thing about them is there's aquatic safe versions available. So that is a great option for heavy stands along stream sides or places where you want to really protect your aquatic resources. Again, with foliar treatments, that should be done before flowering. Now there's pre-emergent is another option. We've actually done some research looking at this. So there's multiple different pre-emergent herbicides out there. You would want to apply them before spring seed germination, right? And the nice thing about pre-emergence is it works on growing seed and not necessarily perennial plants that are already rooted. The problem with them is that it's going to work on pretty much any seeds that are trying to germinate in there. And the other issue is they don't really have an aquatic label. But if you have heavy stands that are just loaded with stiltgrass, and you want to kind of really tamp that down or limit the germination and limit the seed growth. This is something you can do in the springtime, that if you use the right rates and things, you can have season-long control, right? Again, for heavier infestations, it's a great idea. And then there's some grass-specific herbicides, right? And then we're finding that they can be very, very effective even at very low rates. So one example will be clethodim at, a third to two-thirds of a percent spot treatment. The nice thing about that is that low of a rate can work on stiltgrass, but it may not necessarily kill perennial grasses. And so we're doing some research right now looking at different rates of grass-specific herbicides sprayed in an area that has a mix of stiltgrass and native perennial grasses. And what we're finding so far, just on the preliminary part of this research, is that the stiltgrass certainly does reduce in numbers when you do that. The native grasses may be burned back a little bit, but they do seem to come right back. And so it seems to be a good option when you have this mix of native desirable and stiltgrass grasses kind of in the same area, that you can get some options there. Or if you have an area that has a lot of perennial, or even not even perennial, just have some broadleaf desirable native species, and you want to control the stiltgrass, a grass-specific herbicide may be useful. The downside is there's no aquatic labels, right? So you have to choose your sites where you're gonna use that. Kind of regardless of what you do with stiltgrass, you're gonna need to follow up, right? Stiltgrass reinvades very, very easily, especially if it's in an area that's kind of upriver from you or upstream or uphill from you. It's going to make its way back in, or if there's a lot of disturbance on the site, right? So follow-up is very, very important. And then focus on, there's areas that high traffic areas, right? So trails, roads, campgrounds, that's where you're going to see it come in and where follow-up might be needed. And these can be kind of your priority areas when you're looking at spread prevention. So what I wanted to end with was just some general thoughts on management in terms of kind of how to prioritize stiltgrass. And so if you're in an area where stiltgrass is not known to occur, so you don't have it in your area, I think your priority should be a survey or monitoring program, right? So get out there, look for it, educate people to look for it, things like that, as well as BMPs, best management practices, to help prevent accidental introduction. So things like putting boot brush stations at trailheads, establishing equipment cleaning standards, particularly for equipment off-site, building an education awareness campaign so there's more eyes on the ground looking for it, and then understanding what your potential for introducing it to your environment. It's probably going to be highest with hikers, campers, forestry or firefighting equipment or practices on the ground, ATVs, horse riders, hunters, and anglers. These are all folks that may pick it up somewhere else and bring it to your environment. So kind of understanding where to look for it is a great way there. And so I would focus on roadsides, trailheads, high use areas that get people coming from other regions to visit your area, disturbed sites with timber harvest or wildfires or prescribed fires, either one, riparian areas, bottomland forest. These are kind of areas to focus looking for it. But again, early detection, rapid response, I think is really important, especially that early detection side of things. Keep it out, spread prevention or introduction prevention, and just keep looking for it is important. Now, in areas that have stiltgrass, but it's a new invader, so these are these new spots, you've only found a spot or two, this should be one of your top priorities for rapid response, right? Finding it or controlling it, just because we know how difficult it is to get rid of once it's well established, how fast it spreads, how damaging it is. This ought to be one of your top priorities. And so really your efforts here need to be focused on complete eradication. So you can probably tolerate more kind of non-target impacts if it means getting better control of the stiltgrass, right? So spraying with a little higher rates or spraying even when there's some not desirable species in there. Again, your goal is to keep this from spreading and keep it out of there and trying to eradicate it. So that's what you need to focus on. And then when you do that, look around. So this thing spreads so quickly that you want to make sure that you have that entire population known so you can control it. So survey long distances in surrounding areas to capture that infestation, right? So look at animal trails, stream sides, roads, edges. Look for and really map and find that full infestation so you can truly do a rapid response and try to eradicate it. Should be a top priority when stiltgrass is a new invader to your environment. Now, if you're in an area that stiltgrass is well established, you've got a lot of it, you're probably never going to eradicate it, right? So at this point in time, your focus changes. You're looking at what can I do to reduce the impacts of stiltgrass and prevent spread, if it's not absolutely everywhere. And so I tend to recommend, protecting some significant resources at risk first, right? So if you have natural areas, native communities at risk from invasion from stiltgrass, threatened and endangered species, some of these kind of higher quality sites, those should be your priorities and kind of focus on them or creating a buffer around them of still kind of keeping the stiltgrass out. That should be your top priority because that's where you see a lot of these impacts as well as changing your management. So applications to kind of reduce these non-target impacts important, right? Since simply because you're going to be long-term control of stiltgrass, you may not want necessarily to do really heavy-handed management where you're killing everything to get rid of the stiltgrass, knowing that it's going to be there in the long run. You want to lower those impacts of stiltgrass, but try to do everything you can to kind of save the non-target species. So this might be where you look at grass-specific herbicides or more targeted control. And then just change your actions to prevent local spread, right? So treating the roadsides, treating trails, treating campgrounds, so people are not likely to pick it up. Looking at cover crops in your fire breaks or things like that may help kind of keep stiltgrass from spreading around as much. But overall, once it's well established in an area, you're going to have to learn to live with it, right? So it's going to be there. Eradication is, when it's well established, is really not feasible. So your goal is to reduce those negative impacts as much as possible. And I think you can do that through targeting your resources at risk and targeting kind of these spread prevention techniques. And so I hope this this quick webinar was helpful to kind of introduce stiltgrass to you. I hope it was helpful to kind of show you why it needs the management and give you some ideas for that. Again, I hope that you see other videos in this webinar series from the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and we certainly want to thank our sponsor for this webinar. Again, it's the Indiana Forest and Woodland Owners Association. So thank you all much. Thanks.